Exciting news, you guys. We are getting ready to have our 100th episode, which means that we are doing a giveaway.
Yay! Yay!
I'm going to tell you what you could win and how you can enter, and then you can reach out to us. So you could be the grand prize winner of Church History in Plain Language book and workbook. That's a classic from Bruce Shelley. There's also the Schuyler Quintel ESV Bible in camel calfskin worth $255. What?
One of the most beautiful Bibles I've ever seen. Whoever wins this, I'm so jealous.
Beautiful Bible, amazing Bible, greatest Bible.
There's also a complete map set from Biblical Backgrounds. This is going to walk you through all of the journeys that you see, I think, in the whole Bible.
Yeah, so this is their complete set. So from Abraham to Jesus to Paul's ministry, you get to trace those through the geographical maps that they give you. It's really great for learning and understanding where these biblical events actually took place.
And we're also giving away a 1-year subscription to Biblingo. That is a really cool biblical languages app where you can learn Hebrew and Greek, but biblical versions of those, so not modern versions. And I believe now they've partnered with SEU for college credit for language. So that's really cool if you're a theology student. Pretty sure that's transferable. We're also giving away a French Terry Logic of God hoodie and some stickers, as well as Bible highlighters and pens. And this is all worth about $798.
What?
If you would like to enter, you can go to our Instagram and follow the instructions there. But if you're like me and you don't like social media, then you can just go to our website and submit on the contact form, sharing one of the questions that maybe you've never heard a satisfying answer to in church. It could be something that you've always wanted to ask, something that you have asked and have been disappointed with the answer you've gotten. And then we will do a little mini series with all of the questions we receive. And we've already received 5 questions. So I'm pretty excited about that. So if you have any questions, reach out to us, but we would love to give you the opportunity to sign up. And the giveaway does close on May 31st. So if you're listening to this, it's because the giveaway is still happening. So join us.
Hi, thank you for tuning in to the Logic of God podcast. I'm Cody.
I'm Gina.
And I'm Ben.
If you're returning, thank you for coming back. And if you are a new guest, welcome.
Welcome to Genesis 30, our first quarrel between Rachel and her husband, Jacob.
First of many, I assume.
He yells at her.
Yeah, he does.
But why? What is the context? So when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." That sounds familiar, doesn't it?
It does. It's very similar to the Esau story. Not that Esau wanted to have children. This worldly idea of a immediate need that she wants. The Esau immediately needed fed, and he's, "Give me food or surely I'll die." It also has a interesting callback to Genesis 3 and the serpent's temptation. Did God say, "Surely you will die"?
Targum Onkelos does have more of a sympathetic reading of this. In Onkelos on Genesis 30, verse 1, Rochelle saw that she was not bearing children to Yaakov. Rochelle became jealous of her sister, and she said to Yaakov, "Give me children, if not, I am considered dead." And basically what it's saying is that in the ancient cultures, and even long after that, if a woman bore no children, she really wasn't seen of use to anybody. Like, that was the expectation. She bore children and sons to carry on the family name. And so if she could never bear children, there was no purpose to her being a wife, and so she basically was dead. And that's what she was trying to say to Jacob, is that if I can't have kids, what's the point of me? Which is sad.
It is sad, but Jacob doesn't really feel sorry for her.
No, he
because
doesn't.
he starts yelling at her. So the verse continues, Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant, Bilhah, go into her, so that she may give birth on my behalf, that even I may have children through her." So loaded. So he's, who am I, God? And she's, no, but I am.
This is once again someone trying to solve a problem in a way that they shouldn't. Now, again, this works out slightly differently in that the children of Bilhah are considered to be children of Israel, and they do become some of the tribes. However, this is not the right way to go about this. We saw from Hagar and Ishmael that this tends to cause problems, and it's better to wait on the Lord than to try to take things into your own hands, especially through this drastic of a step, giving your servant as a wife so that you can have children through her. And as we've said before, this is not the way that Jacob sees the children. He doesn't attribute them to Rachel.
And the Bible doesn't either.
No.
So she seems to have tried this kind of fruitlessly. She got a child out of it, but not her own.
No.
I find it interesting, though, because in verse 6, Rachel says, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Is Rachel justifying her actions by saying that God sanctioned the son that was born out of this and that's her reward? It's weird because there's this theme between Rachel and Leah that they believe that the union between Jacob and their servants is blessed by God. How can that be if God is against having multiple wives?
Well, we saw this in the previous chapter where Leah was having children and she kept saying, surely this time Jacob is going to love me. And we see a lot of that mentality of someone trying fruitlessly to pursue something that just is not going to happen. It's not exactly delusion, I would say, but it's a hope against hope. It's that Rachel is so jealous of her sister. She's, no, this is it. This works. Looking at everyone in the room who's just staring back. No, it's okay. Yeah, see, God heard my prayer. God gave me what I wanted. And then later we see her actually having children. She's like, finally, I have kids. What about the other kids that were definitely yours? Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be a cultural thing, I think, from that area, because Sarah does the same thing, and nowhere in biblical genealogies do these children get associated with the mother or the matriarch that gives the servant away to the husband. So Sarah, Ishmael is not Sarah's, it's Hagar's. And same here with Bilhah and what is the other? Zilpah. They're not recognized as the master, so to speak, the servant-master relationship. It's still the servant, and they're given as wives. But the phrase used there is not on my behalf, really. I think it gets across the message, but like the original Hebrew, most Bibles will have, it translates more to on my knees. And from some of the commentaries I was reading, Alter's commentary on Genesis, on my knees is euphemism for adoption in the A&E in that culture.
I find it interesting, though, because Rachel doesn't say God has heard me or God has seen me. She says God has judged me. And later in this chapter, Jacob talks to Rachel about God closing her womb and how that was a judgment against her. So it seems like Rachel's saying, yeah, God did judge me and he closed my womb, but he also heard my voice and I got a son anyway. And then later, she even says that she wrestled with God.
Yeah, and I think that's tying into the judgment there. You see those two parallels, and the judgment is because she's wrestling with God and having this battle with her sister, and she's being judged for that. Like, she has everything already through Jacob. She's the one he loves, but she's still envying her sister in this other way. And I think that's why she was judged, or why she's saying she's judged.
Do you mean that love is not enough for Rachel?
Yes.
I think also going back to your question of, is God blessing this? In a sense he is, and in a sense he isn't. Again, in the last chapter where we saw Leah giving birth, God gave Leah what she was asking for, and it didn't help. It didn't change her situation. Sometimes God gives us exactly what we ask for just to teach us that it's not what we need. And we even saw her starting to come to a revelation with Judah, which is why Judah is the blessed child, why he is the one through whom the Messiah is going to come. She says, okay, my focus should not have been on my husband. It should have been on the Lord. Now we see the focus switch again, unfortunately. And I think that is partly because Rachel doesn't let sleeping dogs lie.
Culturally, we know that the ancient Near East god and goddess stories included fertility battles between gods or goddesses. And I think this being mirrored in the Bible is important to note just historically, because that was culturally a thing. So I can have more babies than you. We see it repeatedly in the story of Hannah and Peninnah. We see it in the story of Hagar and Sarah. So we know that like fertility war is a thing. And I think that's important to note too, because I think Rachel and Leah take it a little too far.
No, and you see that play out through the rest of this chapter too, because there's this trade-off for Jacob, and it seems like Rachel is in 100% control of the marital bed for Jacob, because there's this trading of marital relationship in this three-way marriage. So it seems like Rachel's completely in control, and you have Leah talking about how Rachel has stolen Jacob, the husband, from her, and now she has purchased a night with Jacob, which is very weird. It seems like Jacob's almost holding out his marital duties to Leah in favor of Rachel, because Rachel seems to be getting that and in control of the marital bed, where Leah is, she's had 4 kids, she's good, he's done his duty to her.
So we'll come back to the mandrakes thing, because that does definitely deserve to be explored more.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk for a second about surrogacy, just because that's something that was also culturally normal back then. So it wasn't uncommon for a wife to offer her servant as a surrogate when she couldn't conceive. And according to the Newsy tablets, it was reasonable for the mother to consider the surrogate child her own, even though it really wasn't. They didn't have the understanding of genetics that we have today. And also we'll talk about that later. But in doing so, they somehow believed in a lot of cases that child really was theirs. And I think that's an interesting connection, because Rachel sought victory in a surrogate just as we seek victory in surrogate Christs. So we look for our physical, tangible representation of Jesus in this life a lot, and we're mistaken, and we really could have the real deal, but we're not aligned with God's will. And I think that's what we're seeing here with Rachel.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Bilhah, or however you say her name, then has 2 children, not just 1, but 2. And Rachel's reaction after each child is unique, but the second one is especially notable. So in Genesis 38, Rachel says, "With mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." Cody, you had a lot of thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the wrestling here is an interesting word used, because it's not a frequent word in the Hebrew Bible. I think it's used only 4 or 5 times, and one of them, or two more of them, are when Jacob wrestles God and comes out victorious. And it seems to be used usually in a spiritual context, wrestling, not like a physical altercation. Jacob's was a physical altercation, but I think that story is still touching more on the spiritual side rather than the physical side. So this seems to be a spiritual battle that she's having with her sister.
But it says in the footnotes that she was wrestling with God.
Yeah.
So with wrestling with God, I have wrestled my sister and won.
Yeah.
So she's wrestling God and her sister. That's complex.
I understand that from the Newsy tablets, this is something that, in the context of the culture, these are her children. And yet it's obvious later on in the story, she doesn't see these as her children.
Yeah.
And it's obvious that Jacob doesn't see these as her children. She so desperately wants to beat her sister that she gives her servant as a wife to her husband.
Oh, there are so many tendrils of the culture seeping into their lives. And God clearly has said, be set apart. Don't get involved, or don't absorb this culture into your family. But it creeps in. Like Cody mentioned with the servant, did God truly say that you will surely die? We have all of these different influences coming in. We see Jacob take it differently than Rachel. I don't think Rachel mentally can handle all of these influences, and other people seemingly being fine with things, but knowing that it's really not okay. Like, I think she has a much harder time coping with all of that.
And I don't think we can divorce the fact that she is still somewhat under her father's leadership in this home. And you see that play. I hate knowing future verses, but you see the fact that she takes, what are they called? Teraphim, the statues of Laban later on. Like, she still has connection to the gods of the area. She still has connections to the culture and very much living in that culture. It seems as until Jacob moves away that there is not a pursuit of God, so to speak, in the right manner. There's still all this outside influence corrupting her views on things. And I think you see that played out here.
I also think that there's an element of her feeling responsible in a sense. Like Jacob spent 7 years working basically for free to become her husband, and she can't have any kids as far as she can tell. That, I imagine, would also take a toll on her. We also hinted last time, the Bible doesn't, strictly speaking, say that she loves Jacob. No, I think that she does.
You can think that. I don't agree.
We can think the worst of her, and there's a lot of bad here, but I don't think
it's bad if she doesn't love him back the way that he loves her. I think that there's tension here because it's a lesson from the Lord. And we see that play out later because Leah is the one that gets buried next to Jacob, not Rachel.
I'm just saying, I don't think it's fair to put exclusively bad motivations on her. I think that we can do bad things because of good reasons, or at least reasons we think are good.
Trust me, though, I've gone through the insanity of infertility. Like Cody can tell you, I treated him like a sperm vending machine. Like, you do crazy stuff when you're desperate for what you want. And when you can't have it, you continue getting crazier. So that's what I'm seeing here. Her motives are not necessarily, I want to cement the love that I have with my husband by having his babies. It's, I can't stand that my ugly sister is getting more and better than me. And here I am controlling everything, and yet I'm still not getting what I want. And it's driving her crazy.
No, I see. And I think you hit the nail on the head, Ben, of what you said earlier about this is her identity. This was the identity of females in that time. If they don't carry on the lineage, then they're worthless in that culture. I don't mean that very chauvinistically, but that's how the times were. If they're not producing offspring, then they're not usually that valuable to
the clan
there. And that with the treatment of, what's the female that's born here? Dinah. Like, all of them have name meanings, have context to what they mean. Then you have Dinah, like, just there, glossed over.
Now, to be fair, her brothers really love her.
Of course. She's
we'll
still family.
Yeah.
But even the brotherly love there, that is more because they view it as an attack on their clan and their reputation rather than, I think, their sister. But yes.
And if Jacob dies, his love does her no good if she's childless.
Correct.
So then, of course, Leah, she's like, my sister did it. I'm not having babies anymore. Take my servant too.
And the good decisions just keep coming.
Yes, it's an outpouring. What can I say? Is this like Esau marrying an Ishmaelite to please his father? Do we think that she's just being a people pleaser here?
No, I think this is the wrestling between sisters. Like, I don't.
They're one-upping each other?
Yeah.
At this point, Leah has had 4 beautiful sons, and her sister has had 2 sons via a surrogate. Yes, I get it. Rachel is treating this as a full victory. She's literally, I have wrestled with God and I've wrestled my sister and I've won. I have 2 kids through a surrogate. Yay me. You lose. And no, realistically, the math doesn't math here. Leah has 4 sons. She should be content with that. She should be able to say, Lord, whatever you have given me is enough. And she should be having some sympathy for her sister because it has to be rough for her sister. But that's not the way that she's seeing it. And to be fair, her sister's not acting very lovable right now either. But her reaction here is not the right one to have.
But I find it really weird because if this is truly wrestling, like wrestling is a labor and it's not very, maybe some twisted person really enjoys wrestling, but these are 2 women who want to enjoy the peace of their lives by having their children and moving on, but they can't. And so it's weird that Leah's servant has a second son and Leah's, happy am I. If you have to say it, are you really? So I find that kind of disconcerting. Add a note.
Leah's mentality here, though, is the only value she sees in herself because she's not loved like Rachel is bringing males into the clan. And when she sees that Rachel is doing that, even through surrogacy, she is one-upping her sister. Her value is now diminishing because somebody else is also providing males for the clan. So she tries to reclaim the only thing she brought.
So there's a few times in this chapter that words come up that I'm like, is our understanding of this word like true? And happy is one of those words because like we have a pastor friend that is very into finding joy in the world. And is being happy the same as being content?
Not at all.
No. Is the joy of the Lord the same as being happy?
No.
It's obvious that these ladies are getting short-term spiteful happiness because they're getting brief victories over one another. And that's not a long-term joy. I think that there was the potential for both of these women to get joy, to get the joy of the Lord. And for our giveaway, we'd gotten a question connected to suffering. Don't worry, buddy. We will get to it in our 100th episode. Thanks a lot for sending in the question. But there's a lot of meaning in suffering. In suffering, you can find God. If you take the second to stop looking at yourself and you shift your gaze upward to God, you say, okay, Lord, your grace is sufficient for me. Whatever you do, I'm content with. That contentment can see you through a lot of very terrible storms, and in those storms, you will find God. These women are in an absolutely chaotic storm of infertility right now, and it's very sad, and it's very hard. And Leah, on top of being infertile for the moment, also is unloved, which is also really hard. Like, at least Rachel is getting the love of her husband. Leah's not getting much of anything. And she has the hatred of her sister. But in the midst of all this, she could have said, Lord, whatever you give me is enough. You have given me an enormous amount. This is enough for me. And she does that with Judah. But after that, yeah, I get it. She's surrounded by a lot that's tearing at her from every direction. I don't know that I would handle the situation any better than her. But both of them could have turned to God, and instead they turned to themselves. They try to tear at each other, and they continue to make the situation worse.
Yeah. I think the word happy here is our warning. It's our red flag, because when we're like, I'm so happy today, like it's not the same as the enduring joy of the Lord that you feel even when you're going through persecution and hard times. So that was my like trigger word here was the word happy, because if we're happy, something's probably wrong.
I'm happy. Are you happy? Yeah, I'm happy.
Yeah. So verse 14, in the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and went and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. When Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband. So she named him Issachar. This is really loaded as well. So I want to talk about Reuben for a second. How old was Reuben when this happened?
I'd say fairly young.
Yeah, we haven't gotten through the 7 remaining years yet. So he's at least younger than 7.
4 or 5 is what I got from Jewish tradition. So he's not old enough to really understand what the purpose of a mandrake is. And that is, to me, what makes this verse sweet. Because I think of like Shiloh, she's 4, turning 5. And she goes out in the yard all the time and is, ooh, pretty. And she grabs it and brings it to me and is, Mommy, flowers. And that's how I imagine Reuben is treating her. And after imagining that, then I went and looked into it. So Jewish tradition says that Reuben brought these mandrakes to comfort his mom because he knew she was unloved. So it's like a very sweet, tender gesture. And it makes sense on one hand why they keep calling them her son's mandrakes, because it was an affectionate gesture from her son. So that was really sweet to me. And it's interesting too, because Reuben is capable of a lot of loving compassion to his mother, but then he ends up participating in Joseph being lost. So
the family feud continues.
Yes, it gives you insight into these people are not horrible people. Like Reuben at one time was a sweet little boy.
And yet you can see how the chaos of his younger life probably did shape him.
Yeah. But Reuben was the one who tried to save Joseph in Genesis 37. And Reuben was also the brother left out of the plot to sell Joseph. So when he discovered Joseph gone, he tore his clothes and mourned. So like Reuben still has a tender heart even in his adulthood. And he knew right from wrong. But he, especially as a young boy, definitely understood love and compassion and treated his mom with a lot of those things.
Yeah, you're right. I don't think I had never drawn the connection before, but actually it does make sense. I don't think it's a coincidence that Reuben is the one who does this kind, affectionate gesture to his mother and also is the more soft-hearted of the brothers. No, I'm not going to kill my brother.
Yeah.
What's wrong with you guys?
Yeah.
Judah was the one that convinced the brothers to sell Joseph, but Reuben was the one who was like,
And I
Don't do
think we were talking yesterday, there's some interesting connections with Judah selling Joseph and Judas selling Jesus and some kind of interwoven connections there because
linguistically, they're the same.
Judah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
We'll cover that during that story though, but
So we've established who Reuben is and what kind of a tender little heart he had as a little boy. What are mandrakes?
weird tomato looking things. They're part of the nightshade family.
So they were common in ancient Near East fertility rituals.
Oh, dear.
And knowing Rachel takes the idols of Laban when they depart is an indication that she is still fully involved in lesser god worship. So we know from Song of Solomon 7:13 that mandrakes are a pleasing aroma for romance. So they are like an aphrodisiac. Cody, you had some other notes. I know you all went into this a little more deeper. It was enough for me to know that they were common in fertility rituals.
Yeah, they were common. Like, they're highly toxic, though. They're not something that even the people back then really consumed. They would put them underneath their pillow or something like that and believe that they
What
gave
if their
them
pillow was
fertility.
a rock?
Or made tea out of
Then you
out
got
of them,
crushed
but-
mandrakes, Gina.
But the roots is what they were after. They were humanoid shaped, so that's why they believed they had something to do with the human body.
So why were they fighting over them? Like, why did Rachel want them?
In a battle for fertility, it makes sense that if Reuben stumbles across something connected to fertility, they'd be like, no, I want the thing for fertility.
I'm imagining like a Cinderella style fight over the jewelry. These are mine.
Which one's which sister?
Oh, well,
Who's Cinderella?
that's the thing. I think Reuben might be Cinderella.
Yeah, poor Reuben doesn't realize what he's just stepped into. Like, I picture him being like, oh, this is so pretty. It's so cool. I pick it for mommy. Here, mommy. Where did you get that? I want it.
Your aunt's crazy.
And like knowing that Rachel was a shepherdess, maybe in her marriage, like she no longer worked, but you would think that having to wander the land with animals, like with flocks, that she would know where to find these things, just being that she was in nature so much. But it seems like these were a hot commodity that were hard to find, and Reuben was just lucky enough to stumble upon them.
If they were super popular, you can expect a lot of people were picking them all the time.
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to talk about this part, but I love this part that I've highlighted because I see a chiasm here. I know Cody was like, I don't know if I see that.
Go for it.
So we first see Leah leveraging an aphrodisiac and fertility solution for bearing children, followed by Jacob leveraging wood sticks for animal husbandry, and also Jacob leveraging the soup for the birthright. So are Jacob and Leah more alike and more clever than like we believe? Because I see the connections here where Leah seems to know that what happens might happen, but she's going to negotiate to get what she wants, which is another night with Jacob. And then Jacob seems to be just as clever in his sort of animal husbandry techniques.
So it's interesting. We'll get to it in a bit, but later on when Jacob is asking for his wages, or rather Laban offers the wages, what Jacob chooses is the speckled and spotted and unwanted. And in a weird sense, that's what Leah is. This isn't the woman that he wanted, it's the woman that he now has. He could have been content with the woman he was tricked into marrying. It seems unjust, it seems unfair, but that's what he could have done. But instead, he chose the spotless lamb. He chose the clean, pure lamb, the one that is attractive, the one that he wanted.
She's a little unhinged. But
And now he has two wives, and it doesn't seem to work very well for him. And that, yes, he has two women that he actually married, and then he has the two slaves with them.
The pseudo-wives.
So technically he has four, but really he only has the two. And it doesn't seem to work out. And I do think that, in a sense, the Bible is telling us that Leah would have been a fine wife to just have by herself. And he could have chosen the spotted, the speckled, the unwanted from the beginning, and God would have made that work.
He
Didn't
blessed
have
it
to be that.
anyway.
Yes, he did. He did bless it anyway. But I don't think things needed to be as chaotic as they are here. And I do think that we get little hints that Leah wasn't a bad wife. She wouldn't have been a bad wife.
I think it's interesting that God opens and closes wombs so quickly. I keep saying that, but like Leah is barren here and her son gives her mandrakes. And there's got to be like a slight hope for her that the mandrakes might do something. But for Rachel, it's, oh no, I want those mandrakes. And then she gives up the mandrakes and takes her husband, and Leah, and then gets pregnant that night. If you know anything about human fertility, you have a 12-hour time slot where you can actually conceive once a month. For her to sleep with him that night and to fall exactly within that window would be miraculous, especially knowing that God had closed her womb. So God clearly intentionally caused Leah to fall pregnant here.
I think it reflects the priorities of the two sisters in a sense. As flawed as we've seen Leah be, she is the one who gives glory to God. And so she could have said, no, I'm going to keep the fertility herbs. And she could have laughed in her sister's face. But instead, she's okay, here are the herbs. And yeah, it's not great that they're trading their husband here, like time with their husband. That's
Jacob
not a good
just
look.
Goes with it
Jacob
too.
just goes with it. He's whatever. I'm done with it.
Leah's, I have hired you. It's
and Jacob's like, okay.
I imagine it's because our kids fight all the time. And it's like the matter of fact, like, we traded and fair's fair. And then the parents, sure. So tired of you guys fighting, whatever.
Yeah.
Which jumps back into what you were saying, how Rachel seems to be in complete control of Jacob.
Yeah. And that with the way Leah describes the sons as well here is the names. So like the sixth son, verse 20, then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Like she is still pursuing Jacob. Like she just wants Jacob, but it seems like it just goes into, for me, making it out that Rachel is complete control of the marital bed, the relationship. Jacob's pure focus is on Rachel, nothing to do with Leah, even though she's the one giving him the sons right now. It's all Rachel, no Leah for Jacob.
I find it especially weird in verse 18 where Leah says, God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband. This is another verse where we're like, okay, does this mean God blesses polygamous relationships?
Oh, it's weird because right before that it said, and God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. So God is not void from this situation. He's not away from this situation.
Yeah, I think it makes it weird and confusing and ambiguous to have verses like this where the women are taking it upon themselves to have all of these children. And this is in the repeat story of promised magnitude of children and then infertility. You have the competitive nature of their relationships creating all of these children, like massive amounts of children for the first time in this Abrahamic covenant. I find it really weird that the women keep coming back and being like, I've won. God blessed it. God profited it or whatever. It's just, what do you mean? Because you're doing weird stuff, dude.
God is absolutely present even in the midst of all of this fighting, and all good things are a gift from God. The 2 servant girls who've been given to Jacob as wives, those children are gifts from God. And the children that are born to Rachel and Leah, those are gifts from God. God can still give you good things when you're doing stupid things, and we should all be thankful for that. I know we've gone through periods in our lives where we were acting like awful, terrible people, wrestling with God. And even in the midst of those times, God still gives us good things. We don't always notice that they are there. And we see that here, the focus is frequently either on Jacob or on one another. I have been given victory over my sister because I have a son. And then later on, it's once again, yay, God's finally seen me. If he's finally seen you, what was that before? It's a lack of contentment. It's not really seeing things as they are. But God's still there. God's still using it. And in the end, there are still 12 tribes of Israel that come from this.
Think about, just be reflective for a second, even like the listeners. Think about all of the people in your life that you've met, especially at church, that have spoken on behalf of God and it wasn't true. God really didn't do that. God didn't really say that. That's what I'm seeing here is this like almost false prophet mentality of I want to justify my own bad behavior by saying that God was in it, even if God wasn't in it.
And we also see in just a little bit, Laban attributes the success of his flocks to God, and yet he constantly keeps trying to cheat Jacob. It seems like he's getting blessed despite the fact that he keeps cheating Jacob and doing things that are underhanded. Eventually, it does come full circle, and Laban loses a lot to Jacob. But we don't always see a one-for-one, you sin, therefore something bad happens to you. That's not the way that God operates, and we should be thankful that's not the way that it operates.
Yeah,
God frequently shows mercy. He gives, even in the story of Cain and Abel, we go all the way back to the beginning. Cain was given a lot of benefits, a lot of blessings, despite the fact that he killed his brother. God didn't strike him down. And when Cain was afraid for his life, God said, I will mark you so that no one will kill you. God didn't have to do that, and Cain certainly didn't deserve that. And we don't really see him redeem himself in any meaningful way throughout the story. Sometimes God just shows us love. He shows us compassion. And sometimes there's the inverse. We've talked about Job a ton. Sometimes people live righteously and bad things happen to them. It happens both ways, and it must happen both ways. And it's unfair at times, but that is the way it needs to be.
And we know Rachel's aware of that because she says, God has judged me. And there is multiple acknowledgement of God closing her womb as judgment. So, you know, she might say like some girl from a movie called Mean Girls or whatever, I can't help that I'm beautiful. But God holds against her the love that she has and shows his love to other people who need it more. God, could you imagine if we got struck down like in Acts for telling a lie?
We'd all be dead. Like everybody.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot more convenient, though. Like, then we'd know immediately whenever someone's lying or when we're wrong.
Yeah.
But then it would be like Eve in the garden, and your mom and dad are like, sweetheart, you're old enough now to understand. You've reached the age of accountability, and you must never tell a lie, or you will surely die.
Yeah.
So Leah bears the sixth son, and then a daughter, and then finally Rachel gives birth to a baby boy named Joseph.
But that's a story for another time.
Is it though? So in verse 22, it says, Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. So the things that I noticed here are that first, Rachel is judged by God, and then she is remembered by God. So the word remember is not used super often in the Bible, but I did write down the areas where God did remember people and why. So in Genesis 8:1, God remembered Noah. In Genesis 19, God remembered Abraham. Exodus 2, God remembered his covenant with Israel. And in 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 19, God remembered Hannah. I think it's important because this was something if he remembered her, does that mean he forgot her? But remembering is not mutually exclusive with forgetting for God. So the word in Hebrew is actually zakar, and it means to call to mind with intent to act. Our understanding of remembering is weak compared to the mind of God, but we should try to reflect God's imprint on human creation by remembering like God. So to call to mind with intent to act rather than forgetting and remembering, because that's what God did here for Rachel. It was merciful and it was done in love and grace. Even though she had acted outside of God's will repeatedly, he still heard her prayer and removed the judgment from her. So he forgot her sins by remembering her.
Yeah. So it follows the line of not that he forgot her, it slipped his mind, but like she's becoming the forefront. Like the connection that we have before this is to Noah when the flood is happening. It said he remembered Noah and then basically made a wind blow so that the earth would dry out. So you have this idea of judgment, the flood, then you have God remembering his chosen, so to speak, and bringing them to the forefront to enact the divine intervention, so to speak. And you see that play out here. So the barrenness is removed. God is acting on his remembrance.
And I just think that's really beautiful. And she says, God has taken away my reproach. So she knew she messed up.
Yeah, she was judged.
But she admits it here. Like, he's taken it away.
Hindsight's 2020.
The thing about this is, like, she wasn't really worthy. Like, she didn't do anything magnificent that makes us feel like suddenly now it's her turn and it's great and we should be happy for her. This is just God's mercy. She had to go through watching her sister bear 7 children before she could have one.
I think sometimes we do need to wallow in our own sin and misery for a while to really understand what it is. I think this is the nature of good and evil and of why God allows bad things to happen. Because we're finite creatures, we don't see the full scope of everything. We don't have the same understanding of good and evil that God does by his nature because he's infinite and he is the virtues. God is love. We're not. And so sometimes God lets us stay in these dark places for a long time so that we really understand how bad they are. And then he finally gives us something and we understand how good it is. And not only do we understand how good it is, but we understand how good it is that God gave it to us. We understand how good the thing is for its own sake. We understand how good God is and the gifts that he gives us. And so I do think that this is finally an aha moment. It's frustrating sometimes reading the Bible because it doesn't always tell us what people are thinking, which makes sense because it's not like all of these people told each other what they were thinking. We just sometimes hear what they said or what they did. But I do think there's enough here to tell us that this is a turnaround point for Rachel, that she understands what she did was wrong. The way that she's been acting is wrong.
Yeah. One point that I think is really interesting is since the Abrahamic covenant was made, each generation had the child of promise. So for Abraham and Sarah, that was Isaac. And then Rebekah received a vision about her twins, Jacob and Esau. But in this situation, there is no prophetic wisdom being granted to Jacob over which wife to take or which child is the chosen one. It happens much later. So instead of raising your children with the knowledge of God's plan or intention for a specific child, they've gone in blind. And that in all of this favoritism that shifts, and then in the rift between brothers. And as we get into Joseph's story even more, you see where Joseph is this fill-in or surrogate savior for his family, but the true line of the Messiah comes from Judah. So it's very complex here. What we have is not prophetic. It's just this chaotic childbearing grouping of years, and then suddenly God organizes it. But we, from like the Vacation Bible School perspective, tend to see Joseph as like the important child of Jacob, which he is. And there's a lot of good, amazing scripture that comes from that, but that's not where Jesus comes from. That's why I love the Old Testament.
Why is that?
Because I saw this church the other day and it was New Testament only. And I was like, but then you don't know.
The New Testament matters because of the Old Testament. You can't separate the two. And it is very frustrating, especially considering all the beautiful things that we've seen just in Genesis. And we're not even through Genesis at this point. But the abundant fields that are ready to be reaped in the Old Testament, the beautiful things that you find everywhere in the Old Testament. If you're New Testament only, it feels like a lot of people are New Testament only, one, because they don't feel like the Old Testament matters, but two, there are a lot of challenging things in the Old Testament. It's very easy to spend all of your time in the New Testament and talk about, oh, Jesus is love. It's so easy. His burden is light.
He's the Lion of Judah. Who's Judah? How do you know if you don't read the Old Testament?
How do you know that Jesus was even prophesied about? What is the Messiah? What does any of this mean?
I'm sorry, but most of the New Testament is like connecting dots from the Old Testament. That's what most of the New Testament is. Like, you have the Gospels, which have a fair bit of Old Testament in them as well. But like Paul, being a Pharisee, he didn't lose his Phariseeness. He is still dramatically connecting the New Covenant and Jesus to Old Testament.
And he will frequently say things that will confuse the heck out of you. Women should have their head covered because of the angels. What are you talking about, Paul? What does that have to do with anything?
Oh, that silly Paul.
That silly Paul, always saying stuff.
We were talking about it the other day too. Like, you go from Jacob having 2 wives and then 4 wives and all of the chaos that comes from that and how frustrating that had to have been. and then going to like all the way to the New Testament where Paul's better off just not getting married. Like you get this like humorous, rich context with the Old Testament, with even just Genesis alone. And I could not be a Christian without the Old Testament. That's my spiel.
I don't think anyone can be a Christian without the Old Testament.
Shots fired.
That's why we started this church history with the Old Testament.
We thought we were only going to be here for a couple days, but we kept finding stuff and we're like, oh, we got to go with it.
Yeah. So we're trying to go for full scope church history.
Yeah, we did not have this. When I thought we were doing church history, I was like, oh, cool, the patriarchs, like Second Temple, and then maybe we'll go into who founded like the modern church. I thought it was going to be easy and short and simple. Nope. We're 4 months into Genesis.
We started looking at church fathers, the apostles, and then Polycarp and Irenaeus. So, yeah, these guys will be fun to cover. Then we started on the Old Testament.
Yeah. You can't start a series on church history without starting at the very beginning. And the edification that you get going through this. Like we started trying to learn ancient Hebrew, all of us, and because of the Old Testament and the beauty in that language and the beauty of learning these words, that like Judah having all of the words of God's name, all of the letters of God's name, but the Dalet added in there. And the Dalet has a meaning. Everything has a meaning. Like you need the Old Testament to contextualize the New Testament because the Old Testament is chock full of meaning.
Can we talk about the curse of knowledge for a second? I keep hearing warnings from people that I know that are like, yeah, but if you know too much, then like you'll know too much.
I've heard it a lot with people who, and you get it in scripture too. You get this idea that the more you know, the more responsibility you have, which is absolutely true. But that doesn't mean you should stop learning. That doesn't mean you should stop pursuing, because one of the things we're told we need to do is to love God with all of our hearts, minds, and soul. So pursuing God and the knowledge of God is very important. And
is there such
ignorance
a thing
is
as the
not
curse
bliss.
of knowledge? Is that a real thing in God's eyes?
So I would say yes, but no. It's like saying the curse of responsibility. Responsibility in and of itself is not a curse, and yet you can see how it would be deemed that. Because when you have responsibility over something, if something happens to that thing, it happens to you, and it's worse for you. You have responsibility over your children. If something happens to your children, as bad as that thing might be, if it's harmful, it's even worse to you, even if it doesn't happen to you, because you're responsible for that.
Can you know too much about God? Can you seek God too hard?
The warning that they're giving is a warning against becoming like the Pharisees and Sadducees and knowing about God, but not knowing God. So when the prophets, through the prophet stories, you have this idea or this imagery of them eating a scroll. So like they're taking this scroll, like the word, the scripture of God, and eating it. They're not consuming parchment or whatever. They are taking the word, the knowledge of God, and incorporating it into their very being. So I think you can look at Bart Ehrman. That would be the curse of knowledge for me. He knows the Bible very well. He knows biblical context very well, but he has not incorporated the divine aspects of that into his inner being. He is very headstrong and not enacting any part of God at all, really. I think that's the true warning, but I don't think that's what people take out of it.
Paul laments that knowing the law makes sin worse because you understand what you're doing. That doesn't mean that the law is bad. He even says the law is not bad. But when you understand how bad something is, it does make it worse when you do it. So that is a warning to people who are pursuing knowledge. More is going to be expected of you. More is expected of us because we're pursuing God, because we're going into the nitty-gritty of the Old Testament. And we're also trying to teach it, to reveal the things that we're talking about. If we say something wrong, if we cause someone to stumble because we misreport something or we mislead someone, that's on us, which doesn't absolve the responsibility of the people who listen, but it also puts a lot of responsibility on us and all teachers. And the Bible makes that clear.
We are at the end of the story of, the first half of chapter 30. So I guess we'll jump into this story about Jacob and the sheep and the animal husbandry.
Yeah, I don't think we need to spend too much time on this. There are some useful bits in here, but basically what happens is we come to the end of the childbearing saga. Mostly. Yeah, there's still Benjamin. But yeah, we're most of the way through the childbearing saga, all the conflict that comes from that, the infertility, and then the sons and Dinah as well. And we get to, now we're at the end of the 7 years, and Jacob's like, I want to go home. And Laban says, I don't want you to go home. You've given me so much, and I recognize that God has blessed me through you. So I will pay you wages now. You're not going to be working for free anymore. Just tell me what you want. And Jacob basically says that, look, I'm a shepherd. I take care of your sheep. You have spotted and speckled sheep, and those are the unwanted sheep. I will take the sheep that you don't want. You get the pure white sheep, and I will keep the speckled and spotted and striped sheep. Those will be my wages. And Laban's, okay, yeah, that's great. That sounds like a great deal. But then Laban takes all of the spotted and striped and all the marked sheep, and he groups them up and he sends them away with his sons, leaving Jacob to tend a flock that is all white sheep. Tricky, tricky Laban. He's trying to pay Jacob nothing again. But I think he recognizes that once Jacob gets a large enough flock, he's going to want to leave.
Okay, so here are my questions. Why did Jacob immediately want to leave after Rachel gave birth?
God told him to.
Yes, we get that answer in Genesis 31. In fact, we get answers to a lot of things in Genesis 31, so I don't want to jump too quickly to that. But we know that Jacob gets a dream, and God talks to him. And one of the reasons that he chooses the spotted and speckled lambs is because God shows him a flock full of spotted and speckled lambs and tells him that it's time to go. So this is the end of the 7 years. I think he also sees the pagan influence on his family, and he's lived through that for 7 years. And he's like, this is toxic. I don't want to be here.
Isn't it technically 14 years that he's been working?
Yeah, but we get the snapshot. These last 7 years, I think, occurred during this chapter because it's when his 2 wives are with him. His 2 wives have been, tons of babies. So I'm pretty sure all of this has taken place over the course of 7 years. We're at the end of those 7 years. He's no longer bound to Laban, so he gets to leave, but Laban still wants him to stay. So God has given him a dream telling him to leave. And so he's said, okay, Laban, I need to leave. And Laban wants him to stay. And so he says, okay, God has also shown me a flock of speckled and spotted sheep. So I will stay and I will get those flocks of sheep. That makes sense. However, he's given a situation where reasonably that's not going to happen. The only sheep he has to work with are white sheep. So how does Jacob address this? Well, he does something that's weird, and you don't see a lot of pastors talking about this, and I can understand why, because it's not clear on its face, and the more you dig into it, the trickier it seems to be. Genesis chapter 30, verses 37 through 39. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. What exactly is that saying? Ancient cultures didn't really understand genetics, but there were people who were clever and pieced certain things together, or at least they thought they did. What they saw is that whatever environments they were in, that tended to be the color of the animals that they interacted with. If you are in a forested area, animals tend to have kind of darker fur that's shades of brown to blend into the foliage. If you're in a desert area, animals like camels have sand-colored hair that lets them blend into the sand a lot better. And so what some of the people at the time, including seemingly Jacob, determined is that what an animal sees when they're conceiving influences the color of their offspring. So what's been argued, and I do think that there's a decent argument for it, is that what Jacob was doing is he was pulling from the ancient knowledge of the time. And he thought, okay, there aren't any spotted or speckled animals with me. So what I will do is I will create striped sticks, and I will put these striped sticks in the watering trough. Animals come to the troughs to mate. So when the ewes are drinking from the water, they will be looking straight down into these striped sticks because they see striped sticks and they're being impregnated as they're drinking, looking at these striped sticks. The offspring that they have will be striped as well. Now, that makes sense if that's the way that it works, but we know with the benefit of modern science that isn't the way that it works. It's more of a process of natural selection. Animals that don't have the right colored fur or hair will tend to die off, and the ones that do have the right colored hair tend to stay behind, and they're the ones that produce offspring. Now, eventually, Jacob does breed the animals that become speckled and spotted, and he's a shepherd. He knows how to do all of that. He's not stupid. But they didn't understand genetics, and they didn't understand how you get speckled or spotted to start with. And so this was his attempt to start that process. Now, the Bible does say that he's successful in creating striped and spotted animals. Is the Bible wrong about how this works?
We just don't have the full picture yet, because Jacob doesn't disclose God's plan for this until later. So he secretly knows what God is planning. There's a few things here. So at the beginning of this interaction where we talk about him wanting to leave, Laban's like, I have found by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. So we know that Laban is probably participating in some sort of pagan, ancient Near East divination. We know that the mandrakes and the surrogate wives and all of these things are culturally relevant to Laban's family, to his daughters, to the culture around them. And so in my eyes, I think Jacob is play acting a little bit of the community influence to make them think a certain thing. And he probably is using what he learned through his wives trying to get pregnant so often, because these also have fertility connotations for humans, like the types of wood that was used. But I think ultimately Jacob knew that nothing that he was going to do was really going to influence the mating of the sheep and the outcome, because God has spoken to him and he reveals that later.
Yeah, so that's why earlier I said that a lot is revealed in chapter 31. So Genesis chapter 31, verses 6 through 8. This is Jacob speaking to his wives. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the stripe shall be your wages, then all the flock bore stripes. He later says that he saw in a dream an entire flock full of striped and spotted and speckled sheep, and those were his flock. And that was basically God telling him that this is what your flock is going to look like. So going into his discussion of wages with Laban, he knew that's what he should be pursuing. He pursued it the best way he knew how. And so it's not that the sticks themselves caused the animals to become striped or spotted or speckled. And he even admits as much here. He says it doesn't make any sense because Laban changed his wages 10 times. But every time Laban changed his wages, that's what his sheep became. Laban said, okay, now it's just spotted. There's no stripes. Stripes are mine now. Spotted is all that you get. Then all of the sheep became spotted. And Jacob had no ability to control that, and he knew it. So ultimately, Jacob is attributing the success and the appearance of the flock to God. And he was just doing the best that he could with the knowledge that he had, but ultimately he knows the knowledge he had is not enough.
So I have a question, because when we talk about like the types of sacrifices that were done, even like later in the Levitical law times, weren't the sheep that were sacrificed required to be without blemish? So like pure white. So wouldn't Jacob taking all of these striped and spotted animals make it genetically more difficult for him to get the pure white sheep back?
Yes.
So it would have made his worship harder, and it would have made his sacrifice more precious.
It means that God will provide. That's what he had to rely on. He had to rely on God first to even get the striped and spotted and speckled, the unwanted sheep that God was giving to him. But later on, when he was going to sacrifice, God also needed to provide the animals that would have been almost impossible at that point once again, the pure white lambs. And we see this a lot. There's the red heifers that needed to be sacrificed for the temple. Those are very difficult to get. In fact, near impossible. And the level of scrutiny that they had to go through for those red heifers is insane. A single hair that looks off color, the red heifer doesn't count anymore. But that's what you needed in order to get the purifying ashes for the temple. And we don't even see red heifers today. There are people who've attempted to breed them. And there were some stories not that long ago about some red heifers being shipped over to Israel, but it turned out they still weren't pure enough. That is the measure of purity that was needed. And that's the measure of purity God provided.
Yeah.
God will provide the sacrifice.
But I'm sure there are still people who listen to this and go, yeah, but God didn't correct Jacob. Like, why is this even in the Bible? Why did it seem to work? Why does it mention Jacob putting the sticks in the water and that seems to work? Well, there are plenty of other times where similar things happen, where God gives instructions and people follow it the best way they know how. In 2 Kings chapter 20, verse 7, and Isaiah said, bring a cake of figs and let them take it and lay it on the boil that he may recover. This is the prophet Isaiah talking to King Hezekiah. King Hezekiah is sick. He's got a massive boil. He's been told by Isaiah he's going to die. And Hezekiah is, please let the Lord have mercy on me. And Isaiah is told by God, he's going to save his life. He's going to give him another 15 years. So they take a cake of figs and put it on the boil. Now, there's no way that's going to work. But in context, this is God giving an instruction. And this happens so many times, not just with medicine, not just with sheep breeding. There's the walking around the walls of Jericho. Does walking around a wall 7 times and shouting really loud cause it to fall down? Could we destroy a high rise just by walking around it 7 times and shouting really loud?
Do you want to test it? We can take a field trip.
No, I think this is a story in action. God can tell you to do something, or you know you need to do something. You can do it to the best of your ability. It might be completely asinine, but he was doing it in obedience or pursuit of what he needed to, and God blessed it anyway, because he wasn't like, okay, I give up. God, you have to do this. You're the only one who can. Like, yes, but there's still action needed. This is one of the reasons why the Calvinist mentality doesn't make sense to me, because if there's no action in it, then it's pointless. Like there still needs to be action and pursuit and at least attempts to do what God is calling you to do, rather than just sitting passively by.
What's fascinating to me about a lot of these stories, about Abraham's story and now Jacob's story, Abraham was a man of action. That was his nature. He was always doing things. And when there's a famine in the land, he just picks up his whole family and moves them off to Egypt. He's a man who's always been doing things. And yet the mandate from God is to wait. He's told what will happen, that there will be a great nation, that he will have children. And yet every step he takes to try to make it happen doesn't work. Jacob is very different. Jacob is a man who grew up in the tents. He's more of a passive man. He's willing to let things happen around him. And this is an instance where God is telling him to do something. He's showing him a flock, and he's saying, this is what you're going to get. And he's a shepherd, so he's, okay, I have to pursue this the best way I know how. And unlike Abraham, who was required to wait, Jacob had to take action. The action he took wasn't the one that should work, but because he took action and he did it for the sake of God, God blessed it. And he recognizes that and says all of his success wasn't his, it was God's.
One of Michael Heiser's favorite sayings, or one of my favorite sayings of his, is, I have a faith that can move mountains, but if I pray to move a mountain, I better be okay with waking up next to a shovel. There's going to be work in faith still. Like that's part of it. And moving a mountain is still God's, but you still have work to do. You still need to put effort in.
I think that's a really good ending line. I just want to say one thing. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Jen.
Thank you for reaching out to us, not once, not twice, but 3 times this week. Your encouragement meant so much to us. There were some difficult things this week that we faced, and hearing from you really lifted our spirits. So thank you for reaching out. And to our listeners who haven't reached out yet, we would love to hear from you. So please contact us however you see fit. But we love you. We're praying for you, and we hope you guys have a great week. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to subscribe and share and leave a positive review. And if you would like to connect with us on social media, you can do so on Instagram and Facebook at The Logic of God. You can also send us an email at main.thelogicofgod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We hope you have a great day.